Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Tuesday, June 30th. I'm Sarith Hawk. Running a county farm bureau is no easy task in America, but the outgoing Tulare County Farm Bureau president has had unique challenges during her nearly 2 decades on the job.
Some of these contacts I spoke to told me that they and Tricia moved thousands and thousands of cattle and calves from at least a half a dozen dairy farms.
We hear more about that and other disasters that Tricia Stever Blattler managed as she retires from the post. That conversation in just a few minutes. But first, these headlines. A prominent Fresno housing developer is accused of diverting millions of dollars from his home building company to secretly buy back a family parcel of land. According to a report from our newsroom partner Fresno Land, the former chief financial officer of Granville Homes filed a complaint this month in Fresno County Superior Court. In the complaint, Ryan Toncheff alleges the owner of Granville Homes, Darius Assemi, fired him after Toncheff refused to certify allegedly false financial documents. Toncheff says Assemi transferred as much as $16 million to a third party as a front to purchase the land. Fresno Land reports the Assemi family has defaulted on more than $700 million in loans. A memorial was held last night to honor the service members killed in the B-52 bomber crash at Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County. The crash on June 15th killed all 8 people on board during a routine mission. The cause of the crash is still being investigated. In the meantime, fundraisers for the victims have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars online through GoFundMe accounts. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled yesterday that states can continue counting vote-by-mail ballots that arrive at county registrars after Election Day. Cap Radio's Laura Fitzgerald has more.
The Supreme Court ruling means California can continue its process for counting vote-by-mail ballots. State law allows a 7-day grace period for ballots to arrive at county registrars via mail, as long as they're postmarked by Election Day. Kim Alexander is with the California Voter Foundation.
We have a 7-day grace period for our ballots because voters cannot control when the mail gets delivered.
President Trump's administration has sought to strike down state laws that allow grace periods for vote-by-mail ballots and argues without evidence that California's long vote count is a sign of election fraud. But Alexander says the grace period isn't to blame.
It's due to the fact that 25% and sometimes as many as 50% of our voters are returning ballots in envelopes on Election Day.
The ruling will preserve this grace period for California voters who cast ballots by mail. In Sacramento, I'm Laura Fitzgerald.
The CSU Employees Union plans to rally today amid a contract negotiation. The contract ends today, but the union has not reached an agreement with the CSU. The union of 36,000 members is pushing for full pay raises, cost of living increases, and protections against temporary and outsourced work. Union members at Fresno State and CSU Stanislaus will participate in the one-day rally. There will be some extra fireworks with the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence this July 4th. The San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District says residents should expect poor air quality and harmful pollutants from fireworks. Heather Heinks with the Valley Air District says residents exposed to the smoke should look out for these symptoms.
Your respiratory system will tell you right away that it is not good for it. After the evening of exposure to all those particles, feel like a scratchy throat and a little bit of a headache and maybe just that feeling of unwell.
Elderly people, young children, and people with any respiratory conditions such as asthma and bronchitis are the most vulnerable to these pollutants.
Looking for a way to support KVPR but can't write that big check at the moment? What about that old unwanted car in the driveway? Your vehicle donation could net hundreds of dollars for KVPR. It's easy. We'll tow it away free of charge, KVPR gets a check, and you'll get a receipt for your taxes. And we can take RVs, boats, and motorcycles too. Find out more at kvpr.org/cars or call 855-277-2346.
And now to our main story. County farm bureaus are important for connecting farmers and ranchers with local resources, as well as advocating for agriculture in county-level decision-making. And the Farm Bureau is especially prominent in Tulare County. The county is the nation's largest producer of milk and dairy products, and it consistently ranks among the nation's top 3 ag producers, alongside Fresno and Kern counties. Tricia Stever Blattler led the Tulare County Farm Bureau for 19 years. She's a native of Exeter who returned to Tulare County after college and working at the State Farm Bureau in Sacramento. And today, she's retiring from the job. She does so after leading the county through many ups and significant downs in the agricultural industry and some personal challenges of her own. KVPR Associate Editor Kerry Klein recently attended a banquet where Stever Blattler was honored for her many achievements. Kerry joins me now to discuss more of Stever Blattler's legacy at the Farm Bureau and starts by explaining what stood out from her tenure.
A lot of people actually talked about her impact on students. So, not only do farm bureaus advocate for agriculture, they also administer a bunch of student programs and trying to cultivate, future ag leaders and leaders in general. And so, you may know 4-H and FFA. Those ag programs are primarily administered by schools, but farm bureaus may have some of their own programs too, as well as funding, scholarships for students to attend college. And many people told me that student success was a major priority for Tricia, and that these programs were more developed and more expansive in Tulare County than in most other counties, frankly. And especially there were at least a dozen students there that night who were being given scholarships to attend college the night of this banquet that I attended. The county also has a youth leadership program. It's not specifically for ag students, but for any students who are interested in leadership and policy advocacy, and this program would take field trips to the state capital, to universities, to farms, to other businesses around the county and around the state. And lots of people told me this was really quite unusual for a farm bureau to have a program, this developed, and it's a great incubator for student leaders.
Yeah, I love that she's paving the way for future students in ag. A lot has happened in the 19 years that she's been at the helm, including a lot of disasters that have happened in our area. What was something that comes to mind for you?
One was a wildfire in 2020. I mean, of course, there are wildfires every year. In 2020, one that really affected the Tulare County area was the SQF complex fire. It was a number of small fires that joined together to make a complex fire. They were lightning started. And during a change in wind direction and that fire in August and September of 2020, there were a whole bunch of areas that were evacuated. And in that time, Tricia was called in to help manage large animals and livestock that had to be evacuated along with their owners. The county needed an animal shelter when people were evacuated, and Tricia was there with the county animal services when they created a shelter at the rodeo grounds outside of Wood Lake. And she had the expertise there for not just, pets and things, but for livestock that needed to be taken care of, animals that needed to be milked and fed, and whatever else they needed. And she also helped to find alternate homes for some of these animals during the disaster. And she was able to actually work out a lot of protocols and even contacts with other agencies for these large animals that became useful in other disasters.
Wow. And how did that experience shape how she handled later disasters, for instance, like the flooding of Tulare Lake?
Yeah, well, it turns out that when the Tule River breached levees in Tulare County in March 2023, many farms and dairies specifically were in the path of that rising floodwater. And so Tricia and other ag leaders found themselves in a similar position to the SQF fire, the SQF complex fire, needing to move large animals on a tight timeline. And so some of these contacts I spoke to told me that they and Tricia moved thousands and thousands of cattle and calves from at least a half a dozen dairy farms. That's no easy task. You need trailers and you need destinations for these animals. So there were some shelters that were set up, but a lot of these animals, like dairy cattle, they need to go somewhere where they can be milked. In order to avoid getting sick from kind of getting swollen and, not having anywhere for their milk to go. So these contacts that Tricia had developed with other agencies and then also with dairy farms across the state came in really helpful. But also Tricia had contacts with regulators and lawmakers, because dairy farms specifically are regulated only for a very specific number of cattle. And so when some of these farms were taking on additional cattle that had been evacuated from some number of places, these permits needed to be adjusted, for this emergency. So she was able to kind of expedite that process because she knew how to contact not just in Tulare counties, but in other counties with dairies. And farmers and ag leaders told me Tricia also helped growers access disaster funding during that time, which is also really important. Farm bureaus are often the first contact for growers when they're having trouble and when they need money or other assistance.
Wow. So we've talked about fires and flooding. How important was her leadership in the 2024 bird flu outbreak?
Yes, that, of course, was a tremendous disaster, not just for Tulare County. Ultimately, hundreds of cattle farms across the state, like dairy cattle farms across the state, had to go into quarantine because their animals got sick. But Tulare County was the site of the first known avian influenza case in cattle in all of California. So they were a testing ground for a lot of quarantine protocols and also public health protocols to protect workers. And I was told Tricia was key in helping connect workers with protective equipment to keep them safe. She was coordinating outreach and information sessions with farms and growers, and she was connecting businesses with the public health department for things like inspections and testing that needed to be done as part of the quarantine process.
Well, she was very needed and stayed so busy in all these years of her leadership, but I understand she experienced tragedy of her own in this time as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In 2024, actually just a few months before bird flu really became a problem, her husband died by suicide. She is very open about this. It's not anything private that I'm sharing that she hasn't already shared with the public. They had been married 14 years. They don't have kids. It was the two of them and their dogs. He was also a farmer. He worked for a farming company. And unfortunately, farmers are known to be at a much higher risk of suicide than the average population. He had what she says is that a couple months beforehand, he had experienced a change in medication for some chronic conditions. And that change in medication sent him into a mental health crisis that just spiraled out of control in a number of months. So for a time after his death, she says she used the word crippled. She was crippled for a time. She took some time off from work. And even when she returned, she was there part-time. She said she cried a lot in her office. And she really credits her board and her coworkers and the entire ag community for just really being supportive and uplifting to her during that time and allowing her space to grieve and to kind of get back into the swing of things. But she also says that was the beginning of her transition to something new, when she realized that she could really use a change from what she'd been doing so long with the Farm Bureau. So she tells me she's not done yet. She's only 49 years old. She plans to do a lot of consulting. Particularly, she's really interested in succession planning for farmers either looking to get out of the business or, more and more often, farmers' kids are not as interested in taking over after they grow up and leave the house. She's interested in consulting for that, other kinds of consulting and farm administration as well. She's been talking with some colleagues of hers about teaching, at various universities in the area. She's still interested in working with students and education. She's also big on volunteering with animals. She's been a dog foster parent with the Labrador Retriever Rescue of Fresno for a long time, and she hopes to continue doing that.
A really fascinating profile. Kerry Klein, Associate Editor for KVPR. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about Tricia.
Yeah, thank you, Sarith.
And that's today's show. Today's episode was produced by Kerry Klein, Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado, and KVPR, with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Sarith Hawk. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.